The greatest of follies is to sacrifice health for any other kind of happiness. Arthur Schopenhauer. You don't fall for who she is. You fall for what you project onto her. That's the raw truth. What you believe is love often starts as illusion, shaped not by who she actually is, but by your unmet needs, unresolved wounds, and deep hidden fears. Schopenhauer, with his relentless realism, called this for what it is: the will's blind attempt to escape suffering by chasing fantasies. This is the anatomy of projection. You meet a woman, fill in the blanks with everything you want to see, and then suffer when the image cracks. The tragedy? It was never about her, it was about you. In this video, we explore Schopenhauer's raw, unfiltered diagnosis of male projection onto women. You'll uncover how this illusion is built, how it warps relationships, and how to finally see with clarity instead of fantasy. Subscribe if you're ready to stop falling in love with illusions. Like and watch until the end if you're tired of seeing what you want and ready to see what's real. Schopenhauer's philosophy centers on the idea that human perception is inherently distorted by desire. Nowhere is this more evident than in how men project their fantasies, fears, and unmet emotional needs onto women. Projection is not conscious, it's automatic. A man meets a woman and instantly begins filling in the blanks, not based on who she is, but on who he hopes she might be. He sees nurturing where there is neutrality, depth where there is surface, and safety where there may be chaos. Schopenhauer would argue that this is the will acting behind the scenes, bending reality to serve the illusion of emotional fulfillment. The danger of projection lies in its subtlety. Unlike overt manipulation, projection feels like truth. The man genuinely believes he is in love, but he's not. He's in love with an image, a reflection of his own longing disguised as a real person. He mistakes compatibility for chemistry, attention for affection, and sexual tension for emotional connection. Schopenhauer's idea of the veil of Maya describes this perfectly. The illusion is so convincing that the man resists questioning it until the relationship collapses under the weight of reality. This projection creates immediate consequences. The woman, often unknowingly, becomes burdened by expectations she never agreed to carry. He wants her to be emotionally available, spiritually aligned, unconditionally affirming, but only because he lacks those things within himself. Schopenhauer would say that suffering results from the clash between the will's illusion and the world's indifference. The woman is not wrong for failing to meet his image. He is wrong for expecting her to be anything other than what she is. Moreover, projection blinds the man to red flags. He interprets aloofness as mystery, coldness as strength, and emotional unavailability as a challenge to overcome. Schopenhauer's pessimism applies brutally here. The more a man desires, the less accurately he sees. His idealization disables discernment. Even when confronted with contradiction, he rationalizes her behavior to preserve the fantasy. It's not that he's stupid, it's that his unconscious drive for emotional salvation overrides rational observation. This blindness also isolates the man from himself. Every quality he admires in her, the softness, the depth, the care, is something he has either suppressed or lost within himself. Schopenhauer would see this as the will reaching outward for what should be cultivated inward. Projection is not admiration, it's emotional outsourcing. Instead of developing his own emotional world, the man chases someone to carry it for him. But what begins as a search for wholeness ends in disappointment, because no one can complete a man who hasn't faced his own emptiness. The solution begins with awareness. A man must learn to ask, do I love her, or do I love what she represents? To me, Schopenhauer's method of radical introspection becomes the first tool in dismantling the illusion. By observing the mechanics of his own perception, the man begins to separate reality from projection. He stops needing her to be something she's not. He sees her not as his savior, but as another human being. And in that shift, he begins the slow, difficult work of reclaiming the parts of himself he once projected onto her. To truly understand projection, you have to look beneath behavior and into the emotional wounds that shape it. Schopenhauer believed that our desires aren't rational. They're instinctive eruptions of the will, aimed at escaping discomfort. For men, that discomfort is often rooted in unresolved childhood experiences, feeling emotionally neglected, unseen, unworthy. These wounds don't disappear, they go underground. And when a man meets a woman who seems to embody what he's always lacked, comfort, safety, unconditional love, his unconscious sees salvation. But it's not love that drives the connection. It's a deep, unacknowledged hunger. This hunger turns the woman into a symbol. She stops being a person and becomes a projection screen for his unmet needs. If he grew up feeling unprotected, he might chase someone who makes him feel held, regardless of whether that experience is genuine or sustainable. If he was emotionally ignored, he might mistake basic attention for soulmate energy. Schopenhauer teaches that the will creates illusions to soothe itself, and projection is one of its cleverest tricks. It takes pain and wraps it in the costume of hope. The problem is that symbols don't last. Eventually, the woman begins to act like herself, not his fantasy. She shows preferences, boundaries, moods, and instead of adapting to this reality, the man feels betrayed. He thinks she changed or misled him. But the truth is, he was never seeing her in the first place, only the emotional hologram his will constructed. Schopenhauer would argue that this clash between inner illusion and external truth is the origin of most relational suffering. What follows is confusion, resentment, and emotional collapse. The man may feel devastated, but not because of what she did. He feels devastated because the emotional structure he built around her is crumbling. He thought she was the answer. Now, without her living up to the illusion, he is forced to face the void the illusion was protecting him from. Schopenhauer saw this as the fundamental pattern of human desire. Every fulfillment leads to disappointment, because the thing we really want isn't out there. It's buried inside, unresolved. This collapse often triggers one of two responses. Some men double down on projection, chasing another fantasy figure, repeating the cycle. Others turn bitter, embracing cynicism and blaming all women for their pain. Both responses are escapes from accountability. Schopenhauer would call them reactions of the will trying to preserve itself without growing. True transformation comes, not through avoidance but through confrontation, facing the fact that the pain was self-generated, the illusion self-sustained. The beginning of healing is responsibility. When a man takes ownership of his projections, he stops needing women to be emotional mirrors. He begins developing the very qualities he once demanded from them: emotional presence, self-worth, clarity. Schopenhauer's inward path becomes essential here. By shifting the source of validation inward, the man breaks the cycle of dependency. He no longer projects, he perceives. And with perception comes peace. Not the fragile peace of fantasy, but the grounded peace of reality, accepted on its own terms. Projection thrives under the guise of idealization. A man doesn't always know he's projecting because what he feels seems beautiful, inspiring, even sacred. He calls it chemistry. He says she's different. He believes he's finally found someone who understands him without words. But Schopenhauer would warn him, what you call ideal is often just invisible need disguised as destiny. You don't see her clearly. You see the exit sign from your loneliness, your shame, your longing. And when you idealize, you're not admiring someone, you're escaping yourself. Idealization is emotionally intoxicating because it removes the complexity of real connection. Instead of building trust through gradual vulnerability, the man fast-tracks intimacy through imagination. He assigns meaning where there is none. He overinterprets gestures. He mistakes availability for compatibility. Schopenhauer's understanding of the will explains this urgency. The man isn't falling in love. He's running from pain. He just happens to find a beautiful, emotionally available container to pour it into. But once the container starts, asserting its own shape, its reality, the fantasy begins to crack. This crack is devastating because the idealized image wasn't just about her. It was about his identity. He saw her as proof of his healing, his transformation, his worth. When she fails to live up to the fantasy, the man doesn't just lose her, he loses what he thought her love said about him. Schopenhauer would describe this as the collapse of the will's delusion, where suffering surges in not because reality is cruel, but because the illusion was too fragile to hold. Idealization also keeps the man in a passive position. When he believes he's found the perfect woman, he stops growing. He projects responsibility for his emotional well-being onto her. If she loves me, I'll be okay. If she stays, I matter. He no longer builds himself, he waits to be validated. This is emotional outsourcing, and Schopenhauer would argue it's one of the most dangerous dependencies a man can cultivate. Because what happens when the external source withdraws? The man collapses. The other problem with idealization is that it erases her humanity. In placing her on a pedestal, the man strips her of nuance, agency, and even flaws. He doesn't see her as someone with her own battles. He sees her as the answer to his. Schopenhauer teaches that human suffering often stems from wanting reality to conform to desire. And when a man idealizes, he isn't relating to a partner, he's relating to a projection. That's not connection, that's illusion wearing. A pretty face. The way out is sobriety. Not emotional dullness, but emotional clarity. The man must stop chasing highs and start observing truths. Schopenhauer's discipline of perception becomes essential here. Can you admire a woman without needing her to complete you? Can you love her as she is, not as you need her to be? Can you let go of the pedestal and meet her on level ground? Only then does projection die, and in its place, real connection has a chance to begin. Projection doesn't just distort relationships, it silently corrodes the man's sense of self. When you consistently relate to illusions instead of reality, your perception becomes unreliable. You don't trust others because you never truly knew them. You don't trust yourself because your emotional compass keeps leading you into confusion, disappointment, and pain. Schopenhauer warned that the will, unchecked, clouds perception, and a man ruled by unchecked emotional longing will confuse fantasy for truth until his relationships become cycles of disillusionment. The emotional cost is high. Every time projection fails, and it always does, the man feels betrayed. But the betrayal isn't hers, it's his own projection collapsing. The disappointment is deeper than the breakup. It's the realization that he was never truly connected, only invested in a version of reality that existed in his mind. Schopenhauer would see this as suffering born not from what is real, but from the refusal to face it. You're not heartbroken because of who she was. You're heartbroken because of who you imagined her to be. This repeated pattern creates emotional fatigue. The man becomes skeptical, closed, jaded. He tells himself he can't trust women, when the real issue is that he never learned how to see clearly. He trusted his projections, not the actual person in front of him. Schopenhauer's philosophy exposes the absurdity of blaming the world for the illusions we project onto it. The consequence of not learning to observe clearly is chronic emotional chaos, blurred boundaries, over-attachment, avoidance masked as strategy. And this pattern doesn't just affect romantic relationships, it spills into all areas of life. If a man can't see people clearly, he can't build deep friendships, can't lead with integrity, and can't build a vision rooted in reality. Projection creates an emotional filter that distorts everything. A boss becomes a father figure, a friend becomes a savior, a criticism becomes abandonment. The man becomes reactive, paranoid, and perpetually misaligned with his surroundings, not because the world is chaotic, but because his perception is. But this clarity isn't out of reach. Schopenhauer's path begins with detachment, not from people but from illusion. The man must learn to observe himself in real time. When he feels drawn to someone, he must ask, what do I really see? And what am I hoping to see? What need is being triggered? What story am I attaching to this moment? This isn't emotional overthinking, it's emotional sobriety. It's refusing to let fantasy write the script of your life. When projection ends, freedom begins. The man no longer needs women to reflect his worth. He no longer clings to attention, mistaking it for intimacy. He no longer reacts defensively to reality because he's finally stopped fighting it. Schopenhauer taught that peace comes not from avoiding suffering, but from seeing clearly enough to stop creating it unnecessarily. That's what a man gains when he kills the projection, his peace, his presence, and his power. The death of projection is the birth of clarity, and from that clarity, something rare and powerful can finally emerge: connection without illusion. Schopenhauer didn't promise that connection would eliminate suffering. In fact, he argued the opposite, that suffering is baked into life. But what he did offer was the possibility of meaning through understanding. For the man who has lived, chasing shadows, misreading signs, and loving ghosts, that understanding begins when he chooses to see, not to fantasize, not to fix, not to possess, but simply to witness another person as they are. This act of seeing becomes a radical form of self-respect. Because when you stop projecting, you stop outsourcing your emotional needs. You stop looking to a woman to mother your wounds, reflect your worth, or save you from your emptiness. You become responsible for your own healing, your own identity, your own direction. Schopenhauer would call this a withdrawal of the will's tyranny, the beginning of agency. You are no longer at the mercy of what you want. You are finally capable of choosing what serves you. With this reclaimed vision, your relationships transform. You don't confuse chemistry with compatibility. You don't expect perfection, but you also don't tolerate disrespect. You engage. Slowly, observe deeply, and connect from a grounded center. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he spoke of detachment, not cold indifference, but freedom from the distortions of desire. The man who no longer projects is not less emotional, he's more present. His emotions are no longer reactions to illusions, but honest responses to reality. And perhaps most importantly, he stops fearing love. Because what he used to call love wasn't love at all. It was attachment to fantasy, and fantasies always break. But reality, even when imperfect, can be engaged with, learned from, and grown within. The woman in front of him is no longer a symbol, she's a person, and he doesn't need her to be anything more. That absence of need is not disconnection, it's clarity. And from clarity comes peace. This peace also allows the man to see himself more clearly. The qualities he once admired in women, empathy, softness, intuition, are no longer projected. They are reclaimed within. He stops seeking what he already possesses, buried under years of defense and disconnection. This integration makes him whole, not dependent, not guarded, not performative. Whole. Schopenhauer's brutal realism leads here to the quiet dignity of a man who no longer escapes himself by chasing another. In the end, projection is not just a psychological error, it's a spiritual fog. And the man who clears it doesn't just see others more clearly, he finally sees himself, not as a child needing rescue, not as a romantic hero chasing completion, but as a grounded, conscious adult, capable of giving and receiving love without illusion. That's not weakness, that's power. And it begins the moment you stop asking who she could be and start asking who you're finally ready to become. You didn't fall for her, you fell for the version of her you created in your mind. That's the raw truth. And Schopenhauer would have told you that from the beginning. Because what we call falling in love is often the will trying to escape itself. You see softness and call it safety. You see charm and call it destiny. But what you're really seeing is your own emotional hunger, reflected in someone else's presence. That's not love, that's projection. And it always costs more than it gives. Projection is emotional survival in disguise. It lets you feel things without confronting their source. It lets you chase without building. It lets you fantasize without risking reality. But in the end, it's hollow. The woman you idolized begins to disappoint you, not because she's flawed, but because she never agreed to carry your wounds. And when the fantasy fades, you're left with the same emptiness you started with. That isn't her fault. That's the cost of not seeing clearly, and that cost compounds over time. The deeper you go into projection, the further you drift from yourself. You can't trust your judgment. You lose emotional precision. You don't just misread women, you misread life. Everything becomes tinted by what you wish it was, rather than what it is. That's why your relationships feel confusing. That's why you go from admiration to bitterness so quickly. That's why you say, all women are the same, when the truth is, you've only ever related to the version of them in your head. But here's the truth Schopenhauer would want you to hear. Clarity is freedom. When you kill the projection, you reclaim your vision. You stop needing women to reflect something for you. You stop needing to be rescued. You stop being afraid of reality. Because what you finally understand is that reality isn't what hurts. Your illusions do. And every illusion you break is a part of yourself you get back. The man who stops projecting becomes dangerous in the best way. He becomes calm, focused, emotionally clean. He's not swept up in fantasy. He sees people as they are. He hears what's actually said, not what he hopes to hear. He doesn't rush in, he observes, he doesn't idealize, he connects. And because he isn't looking to be completed, he doesn't cling. That's not detachment, that's discipline, that's presence, that's real masculinity. So if you're tired of chasing illusions, tired of getting disappointed by people who never asked to be your savior, tired of feeling lost in every relationship you build, this is your turning point. Stop asking what she feels. Start asking what you're projecting. Stop asking why it always ends the same. Start asking what fantasy you're addicted to, because once you name it, you can break it. And once you break it, you're finally free to build something real. If this video woke something up in you, subscribe to the channel. We're dismantling illusions one truth at a time. Hit like if you're done projecting and ready to start perceiving. And share this with a brother who keeps falling for fantasy, thinking it's fate. This is where we stop living blind. This is where we see clearly. And that clarity, that's where everything begins.